Aloha mai kako. You are watching Hawaii Political Reporter.
We've seen some of the other nightmare situations coming true, for example, in Oregon, where somehow, through some method that we just can't pin down, some of the experimental GMO wheat that wasn't meant for public consumption somehow got added to the food supply. So who knows how that happened. So we've seen this happening. We've seen the moves, just the inexorable moves towards the GMO agenda and basically the taking over of the biosphere by a select few companies with their Terminator seeds and their patents and their iron fist control over the food supply, which is a nightmare scenario, and that really is an endgame scenario that we have to avoid at all costs, which is why it is so important for people to be taking up the real solution of planting your own food and or sourcing your own food locally and trading locally for your own food so that we can get off of the big big food, industrial food production system. That is definitely a key part of this. So no, the GMO companies are not going to give up, and people who want to know more about their agenda, again, I could not recommend highly enough the work of F. William Engdahl in his book Seeds of Destruction, and also his extremely important article, Doomsday Seed Vault in the Arctic, which we've read a few times on the podcast in the past. Very important pieces of work, and I also touched on this in a recent podcast episode about the genetic revolution, the GMO revolution, which I'll link up in the podcast show notes. So, moving on to other parts of this agenda, keeping on that note of GMO and the like, we have an email from Corey who writes, I've now learned that the US accepts GMOs and fluorides much more than the rest of the world, particularly Europe, I'm thinking of. If some of the global elite stem from European countries and places outside of the US, why does it feel like they are promoting this special plan just for us in the USA? If the GMOs and fluorides are being foisted upon us for nefarious purposes, why not the rest of the world as well? End quote. Well, I mean, that's a good observation. I think that the things that are happening in the U.S. are different in nature than, for example, Europe and other places. Again, people can get locked into the localism where they see what's happening in the U.S. with the integration of GMO into the food supply or the addition of fluoride to the water and think that that's just how the rest of the world operates, when it certainly doesn't. Japan banning GMOs, not fluoridating the water supply. Europe trying to get rid of GMOs. A lot of the European countries, most of the European countries not fluoridating, etc. So it is not a pervasive all around the world 100% agenda. That's important to keep in mind. Well, the agenda is, but the implementation isn't. And I honestly think it's just a question of using the U.S. as the establishment precedent. If they can get that precedent firmly established and get it in the American population, then other countries will fall like dominoes. Canada, etc. Tend to fall in line with what's happening. And the even more insidious part of this, through trade deals like the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, you can slip these types of lowest common denominator standards when it comes to GMOs or fluoride or whatever it may be. You can slip those standards into treaties, which are then hardwired into law without ever having to even pass through Congress or Parliament or what have you. Never have to get even seen by lawmakers, never have a public discussion. The public doesn't even know it's the law of the land until it's already hardwired into law by these treaties that are signed behind closed doors, behind the scenes, which is why things like the TPP are so important, because they are potentially threatening to completely change the landscape when it comes to these types of issues, including what kinds of foods can or cannot be banned by individual countries. And that's, I think, one of the most insidious parts of this. I think the U.S. might just be the base where they establish this through their companies like Monsanto and Syngenta and all of those, which are based in the U.S. And through the trade deals, they can get that basically hardwired into law around the world through their trading partners. So I think we have to resist it wholeheartedly wherever it springs up. And if America is a focal point for that resistance, and if we can get it get out of the food supply in America, that would be a huge victory, because that would be a big move in the other direction from their agenda. So I think the agenda is global, but I think that a lot of the focus is on certain places like the United States right now, where this is being established and being hardwired so that it can then be spread around the globe. So again, there are certain focal points of resistance that might be important and might be pressure points that might be privy to leverage that we can use against it. Finally, let's talk about the big agenda that we're kind of dancing around here. We've got an email from Richard. What you have been uncovering scares the hell out of me. What are the motives of the puppet masters? Do they know something that we don't, which may be driving their actions? Are they some kind of devil worshippers? How else can you explain their sick behavior? What is their end game? Well, Richard, this is the big question. This is the question everyone is asking about, or speculating about, or everyone has their own pet theory, etc. And this is kind of what's behind all of this, whether we're talking about GMOs and fluoride, or whether we're talking about the war agenda, whether we're talking about total government surveillance, whatever one of the topics that we cover here that you want to talk about, they all do source back to this big question. If there is this capstone of the pyramid, and there are the very few at the very top puppeteering this system, why are they doing it? To what end? And what will that end game actually look like for them?
Hawaii Political Reporter is not owned, influenced, or an agent of corporate, government, or special interest. We are a local, honest, independent source of political news and commentary. Our primary goals are to promote awareness of the non-aggression principle and to reduce violence, war, and death. To promote economic liberty, prosperity, and true civil rights as in the U.S. Constitution. To promote transparency and to bring awareness of corruption in government and the collusion at all levels with big-moneyed individuals and special interests to deprive the people of true choice of government that is truly by and for the people, for prosperity and freedom.